Erica Allaby from EMQQ. Here's Claire du Plessis from Tidal. Hello.
Hi, Erica.
Hello, great to see you.
So you do know each other.
Well, I know of Tidal, so.
Okay. Gotcha. And I believe a mutual friend, Mike Venuto, is on the advisory board for Kevin and EMQQ. So
Yes, for sure. We definitely admire what you guys have accomplished over there, no doubt.
It's great to meet you, Erica.
You too.
yeah, so it's excited to bring two of you together. And part of my purpose for this podcast, obviously, is putting a spotlight on marketing in the financial services world and getting a chance for marketers to connect, learn from each other, share their ideas, and hopefully, evangelize the importance of marketing in the profession, and particularly in an area like ETFs that is so hot in terms of the volume of activity. The marketplace is crowded. Firms are trying to figure out how they want to present in marketing, how much commitment they want. Do they put someone like the two of you in a position to run the show? Do they have other ways to backfill that in terms of their overall growth objectives? And so we're excited to have the two of you join the Marketing Matchup show today. And hopefully today's conversation will help the two of you get better acquainted, and as we dive into what we'll cover today in the show.
Awesome.
Great. Looking forward to it.
All right, so without further ado, we'll let each of you formally introduce yourself. So I like to have our guests introduce themselves briefly in terms of for the context of what are you bringing to the table here in terms of your background and story, understanding what your perspective, what drives your perspective. And so, Erica, maybe I'll start with you first. Like, why don't you just tell us what drew you to marketing and ETF marketing specifically? How did you get here?
Yeah. So I have always been a lover of storytelling. I studied journalism in college. And so, when push came to shove upon graduating, was looking for a job. And I feel like marketing was really just a natural extension with better pay. So, have definitely been very, very focused on producing, top-notch storytelling and content throughout this whole process. So I ended up joining as Robo Global's only marketing person. I was 21 years old and got to wear a ton of hats and have experiences that I really never would have had otherwise at that age. And I was particularly interested in the robotics, AI, healthcare tech field, and felt like there was a lot that I could do from a storytelling perspective there. I did not have any background in finance whatsoever. So it was definitely a major learning opportunity, but we were just kind of all hands on deck, and a lot of collaboration was going on constantly, a lot of questions and learning as I went. And so I was there for almost 10 years, and we went to acquisition with Vetify, and there was just kind of a natural extension to where I am with EMQQ now. 3 products, very niche, still in disruptive tech. And so I think for me, being in ETFs, the product is really important to be able to stand behind and market with conviction.
Terrific. And then Claire, tell us your journey. How did you get into ETF marketing?
Yeah, so a little bit more of a back-end story than that. So I've been in marketing for 20 years plus, and a bit more of a kind of a global story behind that. A lot of FMCG, finance, I feel like I've crossed every category along the way. And I guess you could say ETFs found me, so kind of got headhunted in. I'd always kind of dabbled with always had finance in my portfolio along the way. And it really kind of drew me in with it's the growth category within the investment space. So that's always kind of intrigued me. And kind of the more I got to learn about it, it was like, okay, this is the hot sauce, right? This is where it's all going to happen. And that was kind of the beginning of what I was really grateful to join. So I haven't looked back since then.
Well, obviously, both of you taking different journeys, but find yourselves involved. And I think Erica put it the right way, like sort of some of the leading edge where ETFs can really make a difference. And with EMQQ, for example, obviously they have products that are focused on innovative tech and things like that. And Tidal, of course, has an array of products that are doing really interesting things. So I want to start from a different perspective. I was going to ask you first about how do you stand out in a crowded marketplace, and we're going to get to that. But specifically, you're dropped into the world of ETF marketing today. What are the couple of rules of the road you think marketers should be thinking about in terms of being successful? I want to start there. Claire, I'm going to pick on you. I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about these things, but what are you asking your internal team, your partners? What's the advice you're giving externally in terms of how do you drop in and understand how to operate successfully in the world of ETF marketing today?
So I think that a lot of the time, we see a host of issuers coming in. We're a white label, so, we've got clients coming in all the time, and they'll have a kind of the beginnings of an idea, and we'll work with them with our product dev team and really kind of mature the idea to a final concept. But part of that process is really figuring out who this product is actually for, what end investor are we talking to? And that's a really important part of the journey. And I think that it's often neglected. And in part of that journey is really understanding what is the key differentiator? What is the problem you're solving? What is that point of differentiation and probably more distinction than anything else? And I think that most of the time, not enough time, if any time, is spent around that. And it's you can really see it, kind of, you say the power of the product, it'll always triumph most other efforts. If you get that right and you kind of get the storytelling right, as you say, Erica, that will always kind of leapfrog most of your competitors, and that you'll have a true match in terms of what your end RIA investor's looking for and in terms of what your product is actually delivering and how you deliver that story to your investors.
And Erica, what would you add there in terms of your sense of the rules of the road? And you're talking to ETF marketing crowd. What do people need to keep in context in terms of being successful in this landscape?
Well, I think that some of it is luck. It does depend on what your product is and timeliness. And, sometimes the nature of news developments and things that are coming out perfectly align for some products. And that is a really, really beautiful, lucky thing for certain products. But I also think that it's, the product, it's important that the product has a strong foundation, and it's something that, you can definitely point to and say, this is not something that's going away. So, the spark of the topic itself and the niche is huge. And especially as retail continues to flow into the space, I think it's a really interesting spot to be at, where you can be a little bit more, splashy than just with the institutional side of things.
So as you mentioned, retail flowing into the space, I think we saw retail being talked to and addressed much more directly by issuers over the last 5 years, in part because of the distribution issue of sometimes it's harder to get a new product bought by financial advisors, large RIA firms, broker-dealers, and to get some cash into your product, having some retail appeal didn't hurt because you could buy it anytime if you've got a public or Robinhood account, right? Uh-huh. So what degree of that ramp up, when you talk about, and I want to go this direction, Erica, of that ramp up, the need for attracting assets early for some of the more innovative issuers matters, where the retail buyer comes in mind. And I know, Claire, with your team, you have products that are designed for traders, some for longer-term investors, some retail investors in mind. When you think about that, at what point in the product creation or product concept cycle do you think the audience comes in mind before the actual strategy? Is it the strategy first, then the product, and then because if this is fundamentally about the distribution and the audiences, how do you make that call? How do you decide? Well, the puck's moving towards retail, so we build this for retail. I welcome either one of you to respond, but maybe Claire, I'll go to you first. How would you address that?
It's almost more like a culture fit, we find. So those kind of firms that are a little bit more buttoned up and kind of institutional is just more their culture, and that's what they do. Going into the retail space is a very uncomfortable space for them. So now you're talking about, it feels like the Wild West for them, right? So it's like influencers, and it's a very, what feels like a very unregulated environment for them. And so you'll find that those kind of firms feel a lot more comfortable going more in the institutional route. They also have the, kind of the deep pockets to put enough seed in to kind of get themselves out of the gate sufficiently to get, kind of get themselves into an RIA office quicker than maybe your smaller issuers. And you'll find that kind of, usually it's more of like a smaller issuer, but again, it goes back to culture. We have more of a culture fit with retail and a bit more of that spirit with retail, and the products then typically can talk to that. And you'll find like one of our clients is Defiance. So we've just launched Battle Shares with them. And it's, Elon, you're doing all of the work for us. So, you can long Tesla and short Ford, or we've got Yield Max, which got 44 funds going across there, where you can, kind of, it's all leveraged funds and derivatives. So it's kind of the spirit of the issuer. And I find that drives that relationship and that product development a lot more. And it turns on how comfortable they are in that space more than anything else.
And Erica, how would you address that when you think about the product development versus the audience targeting? Where does the strategy come before the audience and vice versa in terms of you think about presenting ETF product to market?
Yeah. It's kind of can be the chicken or the egg situation, right? I think that either can be successful for sure. It just depends on, how much money you have to back it up too. Obviously, in order to touch the retail market, you need to be putting substantial money behind it in order just to get eyeballs to begin with. It's just a different, a different avenue that you're taking. Whereas if you're, trying to hit the institutional investors, it's just a lot more traditional. And relationship building and having those direct conversations. But I think either could be successful. It just depends on where you're at the beginning of those stages. But, inspiration strikes from all angles. And so I think that when a particular theme is presenting itself, usually, in the news, that probably is something that has some of, can have some of the retail investors in the back of your mind to begin with that audience, but just gotta feel conviction to begin with,
So I know both of you have subscribed to using Publicity for your products and your company in terms of showcasing your story and highlighting either new entrants or the success of existing products and things like that. Why do you think Publicity works so well in the world of ETFs, and why have issuers relied on that a lot in their marketing? There's multiple TV shows now dedicated to the world of ETFs. So I'm curious to see what your reactions are. And Erica, I want to pick on you first since Claire did the last one. So looking at that, you said in your notes that, earned media and public relations is a big part of the storytelling strategy. Tell us why.
Yeah. Well, I think especially being at a smaller firm, you can help by leveraging those eyeballs. You have an entire new audience that you wouldn't naturally be able to reach to begin with. So there's that. But also I think thought leadership is so critical. And by, taking the opportunity to develop a personality from within and really, have them become an expert in the space, I think is just invaluable, especially when you have, different, a really competitive landscape going on. It's really the people and the experts. And I think that that builds a lot of trust too for the investors as well, once you actually can put a face to the product.
And Claire, how would you take that?
I absolutely agree. You want to be punching through and you want to be kind of recognized, building that reputation, building the kind of, exactly to your point, that thought leadership and that authority. That the number one thing that always gets replayed in all the kind of the research documents that you'll read is that advisors need to be educated. They're gasping for it. And so that is one of the key pillars that you can kind of lean into that appears to be somewhat unbiased, your inner journos kind of realm in which they're kind of almost incentivized to ask the hard questions, to dig into what should be gray areas. And so it's almost seen as a little bit of a torture test. And so I think that advisors almost feel like they're getting the truth in that moment. And so I'm a big fan, and I feel like that it is a really important vehicle that is part of the mix that can drive that authentic education that advisors and investors are looking for.
Well, obviously, at our agency, we're obviously a fan of deploying media engagements as part of the strategy, but more bigger picture, I think you hit on something when you talk about cutting through the noise. If you are an ETF issuer launching today, it's unlike what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago when Robo launched, for example, when there's the idea of Robo and robotics and AI was a novel thing as opposed to AI being every other word on your feed when you're watching Bloomberg or CNBC, right? And so there's a little different leverage point for standing out in that situation. So I'm gonna go back to the question I usually like to start with when you have these discussions, like how do you stand out? Like what are some of the things firms are doing, PR included, obviously, but what are you doing to stand out? And Claire, and like one of the things, watching Tidal with some admiration, you try to own the ETF master's mantra, trying to be really expert at everything that's important to being successful in the ETF business. And so with that mindset, like what are some of the things you think, if you had a little mini checklist of things to do to be a master of ETF marketing, right? What are some of the things you're encouraging your new issuers to do to stand out?
So for me, it's always it's kind of, you want to be making sure that you are always curating the highest quality context meets content moments. And I think that, kind of often it is a little bit of marketers will feel a panic and they feel like they have to be absolutely everywhere. But I think that if you're really strategic about where your brand is and make sure that those moments are really impactful and meaningful and content and context are just that beautiful match that makes sense, you become a high quality, highly impactful brand that people notice. And in that moment, it's an unapologetic moment. You are delivering your proposition that is well thought out, well curated, and it has value. And I think that that's where you've got to spend your time, is sharpening what your value is. I think that too many times I kind of, see things, walk past things, and I go, did anybody think about that? If you spent just 3 minutes thinking about that, it's like it just means nothing. So if that kind of time is spent and that kind of love, if I can put it in that way, is put into the work and the strategy and the thinking, I think that that's probably just the first place to start. And at the end of the day, it's that connection that you want to make and truly do solve a problem with a well thought out, simple, clear solution.
And Erica, from your perspective, what do you think are some of those other elements for making sure you stand out in the crowded marketplace?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with everything that Claire said. I love context, content, connection. And all that said, I feel like staying on top of whatever is going on in your space at that point is critical, and not, overlooking whatever's happening in the news and just facing what is timely head on is really important. And doing so through, getting directly in front of your investors whenever possible. And, through that, we utilize email constantly, email marketing. I think that it's just a really, really great it's like the direct landline to investors in a way that you're not naturally able to get in front of them and have their time in any other way. That's also why obviously interviews on the news work perfectly, because it's, 2-minute, 3-minute snippets. So using that attention very wisely, but also continuing to educate and continuing to create content that is a value add for investors, where they actually feel like they've learned something and can pull away from that and, bring it into just the context of their own life too. It's not just selling a product, but also, educating them along the way.
So you think back to these standout moments, part of it is also you have to operate in the belief that your product has relevance and somewhere it's solving a solution or an investor is going to be excited by it, right? And I've often said to clients and friends in the industry, when people talk about, well, is this a good product idea or is this marketable? I firmly believe every ETF out there has its moment. It may not have hit yet, but there are conditions where things will really help it stand out. And I think back to early in my career, we helped launch Hack, the first cybersecurity ETF. Great ticker, great timing. And there was an upstart issuer, Pure Funds at the time. Andrew Chanin was running that business. He was bringing that thing to market. It launched, and lo and behold, less than 3 weeks later, Home Depot and Sony had their colossal hacks, and it was all over the news. And we were able to activate with Andrew and the team behind that product to promote it, and then Hack became synonymous with cybersecurity investing for a period of time in terms of the ticker. And so the lesson for that was, ever since then, it's like, you don't know when your moment's gonna come, but you need to be ready for it. And so turning the questions back to the two of you, it's like, well, you have multiple products. Some might be in favor, some might not be. How does an ETF manager, an ETF issuer, ETF marketer, how do you sit there taking a look at things like, all right, how do I stay ready to pounce on those moments? What do I do? What's the blocking and tackling that I shouldn't give up on, even if my strategy is out of season? What are your thoughts there? Erica, any input there?
I feel like just by already having a consistent brand built out and having a flow that works for your team is just critical, because you're not having to build an entire attack plan to begin with. You already have a foundation in place. But it's also being, it's listening to what's going on and looking for the opportunities when they strike as well. Because, you can't time the market. You can't make these things up, that when it happens and it's huge. But I think that the foundation is just critical to begin with. So as long as you have that, it's so much less reactionary along the way, and you can enjoy the ride versus, lighting the whole house on fire.
And Claire, what's your take in terms of staying ready and making sure that even if things aren't in season, people behind the product are ready to take advantage when the conditions turn in their favor?
Absolutely. So I think, compliance is a reality, right? So we live with that. And to Erica's point, I think that it's really important that you've got your evergreen foundational going at any time. So you've got that kind of bedrock going, the communication that's always in market. And then the great thing that you can always do is that, let's say a hack happens, and suddenly the news headlines are going crazy, it's going to take you 3 days maximum to get something, kind of headline aligned out in the market to take advantage of that news cycle. But you have that evergreen in place, right? So you could pump money into that evergreen and elevate that spend to take advantage over the next kind of 48 hours. At least you have that in market. And then you're going to have the kind of really nicely aligned work that's going to hit, hopefully like kind of 48 hours, with paying, all the rush fees, as many as you can, to kind of get the, kind of the market aligned headlines into out as quickly as you can. So I think that, always being on is really important for many reasons, not only to be ready for a news cycle, but for many other reasons as well. But if we talk tactics, that is one example where we're so lucky in this digital world, right? That was not possible 20 years ago. Definitely wasn't possible, but now it is. We literally can ramp up spend in the most important channels literally overnight and take advantage of those news cycles whilst we get ready with more appropriate creative.
So, in sticking with the hack example for a second, it was one of the earlier thematic players, like Robo was, and they both had great tickers aligned with what they were doing. I heard multiple people say the best thing to happen for retail appetite for ETFs was thematic products in terms of making it ready-made for marketing. How would the two of you respond to that? Do you really feel that thematics were the gateway for firms to really be able to market and touch the retail client? Claire?
I mean, that's where I started my career in ETFs, was very much in that thematic space. And it was fun. Let me tell you, and because there's a story, right? This is where our conversation started, is there really is a story around thematics. And you can dig in and, kind of there's a kind of belief system around it and an audience that really does buy into that story. And it gives you so many levels to be talking, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot that you can be kind of working with in terms of that. So from a marketer's perspective, thematics did do an incredible amount of heavy lifting in terms of kind of like cracking it open and allowing a lot more creativity in, a lot more storytelling in, a lot more kind of interest in, if I can put it that way. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
And Erica, you lived and breathed that growing up in the robo environment. Tell us your perspective on that.
Well, it's just one of those things that's always kind of funny because we were scraping our way along for quite some time and just staying, convicted in the theme and, knowing that robotics, AI, healthcare tech, it was not going anywhere. And so it was almost in a way like we were just patiently waiting for the rest of the world to catch up for quite some time. And then, I do think that COVID was probably a huge catalyst in terms of just the retail audience and the boom that had happened as a result, and people having more time and all of that. But so I feel like a little bit blind to it in a way because thematics has been all that I've known. But I've also loved thematics because of the story and because you can say, point to that theme and that is your story. And sure, there might be, some winners and losers in the bucket, and there always will be, but with diversification and staying convicted to that theme, I think that people just resonate with that better and it's easier to understand. It's like a good stepping stone into the world of finance without having to understand too much.
And both of you clearly had fun with that. And I think to some extension too, people often talk about thematics and the use of tickers and creative and fun tickers, right? And we mentioned hack. That's a perfect ticker for a cybersecurity product, right? You can't beat that. That's at the top of the stack.
Yeah.
Robo for robotics. You've seen that play out in a lot of different ways. Claire mentioned earlier their battle shares product, Ford versus Tesla, Elon on the ticker. At what point do you worry about like the tickers becoming too much of a gimmick and not enough of a support, right? Like you have situations where sometimes you lose the underlying fundamental trade or underlying investment strategy because people are so caught up. Like we saw for a little while with MJ when the first cannabis products came out. That was a ticker that kind of threw people off the scent, so to speak. No pun intended, right? And so talk to me from an ETF marketer's perspective, the role of ticker selection, how it helps, some things to consider from a drawback perspective. Erica, I'll go to you first since you were last time. How about that? You get the ticker one first.
Yeah. I mean, if you can come up with a great ticker, that is just gold. We spent so much time when we were thinking about launching new products, just brainstorming ticker ideas and had a rolling, list on the whiteboard. So a great ticker, it can do a lot for you. But that said, I don't think that a bad ticker is necessarily going to hurt you. It might not be pulling in on SEO and things like that in the way that you would hope that it would. But I mean, take Robo, for example. You say Robo, great ticker. People were so confused because they were thinking of robo advisors. And so you never really know how something's going to be received, but I think that it does give you an opportunity to be more playful than you naturally would be able to in the world of investing.
Gotcha. And Claire, when you think about tickers and matching it up for the marketing effort, how far does your team go and how important can it be in marketing?
It's one of those things that if it comes together, it can be gold. Yeah. And it's kind of like the principles of branding, right? Is that if you can say what you do in your name, that's a home goal. That's a home run, at least. So, if we look at chat, if we look at Elon, if we look at, those kind of tickers that really do say what the underlying, kind of strategy is. Robo, okay, there was a little bit of confusion there, but if you can kind of say, kind of suggest what the underlying strategy is in the ticker, it really is gold. I think that I agree with you when it starts getting a little bit too clever and it kind of trips you up and starts confusing investors. Yeah, okay, then it's gone too far. As kind of a little bit too much of anything is bad. So it really goes back to strategy. Like, what are you trying to do with this ticker? And I agree that if it doesn't come together in that beautiful moment that explains the strategy in just 4 letters, then okay, fine. A bad ticker is not a bad ticker. And then the job is then the usual job, right? To then kind of get the fund out there and do the usual job. But man, when it comes together, it's pretty beautiful.
Well, and there's been a lot of fun been had by that. I know Eric Balchunas at Bloomberg will talk about that periodically, some of the best and worst tickers out there. And so it gets people's attention, gets people talking, which is obviously foundationally part of the marketing, right? You just say, what is this thing, right? And it could be something simple, like you see the CLO ETFs out there where it's CLOZ. And as you say, at least people, it's not necessarily clever, but it's obvious, which is part of the deal. It's like you want to be obvious what you're buying. And so I think it goes a long way. And I'm sure as more crowded we get, the more we're going to see people trying to be adventuresome or find different ways to use the ticker to their advantage. Yeah. It's all fun when people hear about you. You have a big splash from a PR standpoint. You have a good launch. But where the rubber meets the road in ETF marketing is how do you align that storytelling, that visibility with actually helping distribution and getting the ETFs bought or sold, right? And so talk to me a little bit about how your firm see the alignment between the marketing side and the distribution side. Like, Claire, what is your team doing to make sure that all the good work you're doing in marketing sinks in terms of making sure that these products get picked up and that the assets are coming in, there's volume in the trading, et cetera? Like, what are some of the things you think you're doing well to make sure that alignment's happening?
Yeah, so synergy is a word that we use a lot. And that is very much, kind of synergy between marketing, sales, and distribution and capital markets. So we kind of spend a lot of time with our clients kind of trying to embed as much information and experience as we possibly can. We're a white label at the end of the day, right? So we don't actually go into market and do all of that work. We share as much experience as we can, and we provide as much of a framework as we possibly can. So there's a lot of kind of, like I say, strategizing in terms of, this is a kind of the basics of a marketing plan. And when you go into that sales environment and RIAs and that education kind of moment, moment. And ETFs are different. You can't sell them the same as a mutual fund. And by the way, you can't have the same salesman as a mutual fund. That's not going to work either. And so there's a lot of training that goes into that as well. Same with distribution, getting everybody on board. There's a whole process there, right? Which is also can be to a large extent quite different. So it's more of an advisory role that we sit in, and just kind of making sure that there is a lot of, I guess, hand holding and imparting of knowledge and making sure that everybody is, kind of feeling that cohesive kind of experience. But yeah, synergy is a word that you'll hear us use a lot. And it really is important that whatever has kind of started in marketing is drawn the whole way through, because there's no point in kind of developing an entire marketing strategy and campaign, and then by the time you get to the RAA, the messaging is completely different. That's kind of like, you're just, why? So we just make sure that chain of communication is not breaking down as well.
And Erica, in your world, I mean, you're focused on 3 products. You have a tighter organization. How does the storytelling and marketing play into the distribution and product adoption in your environment, in terms of being a place where you've got several $100 million under management in those 3 products?
Well, I think that starting the conversation with the sales team and distribution team is really important, and aligning from what they really are looking for and hoping to have to be able to bring to investors is kind of where I've always tried to start, versus creating content, creating documents that are not utilized or even helpful. Obviously we are a smaller organization, so my effort needs to go directly into what is going to be helpful for our people to sell the products. So I think that conversation is huge, and then making sure that from there, any content you are developing is, maybe you're creating something bigger, a research report that you are able to kind of piecemeal and take apart and present the full research report to a certain, audience, and know that segmenting out to blog posts, and that's going to reach, an entirely different audience, and pushing things out on social. That's kind of the way that I try to work.
So both good insights there. And you think about what else you're tackling in your marketing. I want to make sure we're not missing anything. What are some of the most overlooked or underrated parts of your marketing effort that you think other firms should be doing more of? What I see might be different from what you see. Most issuers that we work with, if we're given the chance to look under the hood of their digital marketing, their SEO, SEM effort, they're not doing enough. They think they are because they've had ongoing spend, but a lot of times they'll say, well, we maxed out our budget. We had a $2,000 or $2,500 a month budget, which would be big for some, small for others. Mm-hmm. But when they come in and say, well, why did that happen? Oh, wow, everyone was clicking, and so we ate it up really quickly, and so that was the end of our budget. Yeah. You're like, wait, you really shortchanged yourself. Or they're not doing anything at all, or their website isn't even set up to make the most of the SEO opportunities. Yeah. But that's the one I see. Yeah. And both of you had different answers, and so I love to hear, what is the most overlooked or underrated piece? Like Erica, like you're looking at it from your side of things, you're really close. Like what are issuers, product sponsors missing in their marketing stack, overlooking, not spending enough time on?
Yeah. Well, the nature of ETF investing is extremely unique. Especially when it comes to the retail audience, you don't necessarily know who is doing the buying. So I mentioned it earlier, but I think that email marketing is really huge, because as you build that list and you have everything set up and connected, through your website, and you make sure that you're building your own valuable list of potential investors, you are getting immediately in front of them in a way that is extremely meaningful. And, with the attention span today, like if you know that you are actually being seen versus, a display ad or something that's just popping up, and sure, it's great for brand awareness and things like that, it's not necessarily getting the same sort of traction and attention that you are getting when you're sending valuable information right to someone's inbox.
And that's good stuff. Claire, how would you take that?
Yeah, I think that you're right. And so two things, sorry, because my brain was drifting back to what I actually did say in my questionnaire, Joe, which was actually product, because I thought that is, for me, that's the most underrated thing. I think that if you get product wrong, it's just kind of like trying to push a mule up a hill, right? Like you're never going to really get it right. So I think that it's one of the things in terms of your marketing mix that you really do have to spend a lot of time on, and really get right. So kind of that moving past that and kind of going into more of a classical communications point of view, I agree with you. I think that we see so many times issuers coming through the door that don't have the basics right. So, kind of don't have a really well built out website that doesn't have proper meta tagging, that doesn't have SEO. The images don't load. There's just basic kind of housekeeping that's not in place. So I agree with you. There's kind of like get your digital assets kind of done and properly and get those fundamentals in place. And then to your point, Erica, having a proper CRM system is absolutely paramount. Having that properly plugged in, having proper workflow systems enabled, getting those lead gens in, making sure that they follow through emails that are then kind of, following through with that sequencing, capturing those leads, making sure that those relationships are nurtured, and following through and building your pipeline. Those are real, like I say, fundamentals that I think that are sometimes we get distracted with what's shiny, and we kind of want to leapfrog and you want to go a little bit further along before you've actually got the fundamentals right. And I always say, like, build it from the ground up, like it's not always pretty, but sometimes you do. You have to put on your boots and you have to build it from the ground up. And I think that's once you've done that, then you can start looking at nice, shiny objects.
Well, and Erica, one thing I love about your answer as relates to email marketing is that many people, when they're embarking in marketing, whether that's their first discipline or they just know they have to do it, they're not necessarily thinking of marketing the same way that native marketers are, and they want to measure everything. And email marketing, there's a lot of ways you can track analytics to see what's working and what's not. I think it's really important, whether you're a startup issuer, whether you have a bunch of products in market, finding ways to track the effectiveness of what you're doing in each category of marketing. And email marketing, because of those resources and tools, and maybe you agree or disagree with this, Eric, but I think fundamentally, it's like, how do I become successful? Well, track what you're doing and see if it's working or not. And if it's working, do more of it. Right. I made the illusion before about digital ad spend. If people are really reacting to it, put more money towards it, right? Like take money away from somewhere else that's not working. And so a lot of times the marketers, they overlook the idea of, okay, am I just throwing something out there, or I have an ability to track what we're doing here?
Right.
Before we get to our parting shot here, I want to say that I believe the two of you are part of the flagship of what the industry needs more of. Committed marketers, telling the story, shaping the message, finding ways to help the industry continue to grow and mature. It's super exciting to see two firms that are trying to do innovative and different things, to have people like you in your seats. And I hope anyone who listens or watches this podcast will realize that the industry will do well investing more and grooming more people to do the jobs that you both do. So with that, I'll let all my guests have a parting shot, something you would leave to your fellow marketers. People are thinking about tips or ideas or words of inspiration as relates to their own efforts in marketing for investment management or elsewhere in the financial services world. Is there anything you'd want to leave behind in your parting shot? Or maybe just something that you want to get off your chest, something that bothers you, or a cliche about marketing that you wish you would go away. You both get a turn here. So, Claire, I'll pick on you first. What's your parting shot?
That feels like a lot of pressure.
Good.
Feels like it's like the recruitment line for the whole of the ETF marketing.
Pressure makes time.
It's going to have to be good, right?
Joe,
if I were to actually, be like super honest, it's been a wonderful, pleasant surprise. I think that, if you kind of, you look at this industry, and I said it earlier on, was that the ETF space is the growth machine of the investment landscape. It really is. And even in times of turmoil, it's still the one spot along in the investment terrain that actually has a heartbeat. So it's exciting. There's loads of innovation going on. And it's challenging. That's what you want. You're kind of figuring things out as well. I mean, every day we're trying new things and kind of driving compliance mad because we're trying to figure out new ways of doing things. And so that's exciting. And it really is, I think that for marketers who enjoy finding where those new boundaries are and then pushing them a little bit further, it's an exciting space to be in, and it's a rewarding one. And so I'm very happy with the decision that I made, and I plan to be here a very long time. So there you go.
Erica.
There we go.
Your turn.
Well, I totally agree with what you have to say. And I think that despite compliance, it creates this very unique opportunity to be creative under a very strange set of terms. But all that's to say, and I think I've made it very clear throughout this entire conversation, I feel like content is always going to be king. And the more that you can provide content of value to your prospects, to your existing investors, the more that's just going to continue to build a very trusting relationship moving forward, and getting creative with it, staying timely with it, just kind of chasing the little bits that are given to you. I think create a very unique opportunity for you just to keep good content flowing through and not just sticking in the confines of, the evergreen that you would naturally be stuck with.
Well, both of you, this time flew by. You're awesome. I really appreciate your time and insights and your generous sharing. Erica Allaby, Chief Marketing Officer at EMQQ Global, Claire du Plessis, CMO at Tidal. Thank you both. So excited that you were able to join us today, and we look forward to talking with you more down the road.
Thanks so much,
Joe.
Thanks for listening to Marketing Matchup, a production of Gregory. If you like what you heard, please listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.